The Greek verb menein is a verb which the evangelist John uses often in his gospel, and the English translation of menein is to remain, is to be united, is to be two in one. In the gospel text that we will hear today, taken from John chapter 15, verses 1 to 9, known popularly as the discourse of the vine and the branches, there are three aspects that we must consider. And the first of these is that God is the vine dresser. That is, God is the one who creates the vine, who plants the vine. God is the one who tends the vine. Jesus is the vine. And third, we are the branches. Jesus gives this beautiful metaphor from nature to indicate who God is, to indicate who Jesus is, and to indicate who we are. When he talks about his Father, and he refers to God as Father, because he had a personal relationship with God, that's why he could call God Father, he tells us that God is concerned about the world. And this concern is shown in planting that vine, which is Jesus, in nurturing that vine, which is Jesus, in looking after and being with constantly that vine, which is Jesus. Jesus, on his part, has grown beautifully as the vine, but not as an individual vine, along with branches, and every single branch is welcome to be part of the vine. He goes on to say that the branch will only have life if it remains part of the vine. There are some branches, for whatever reason, do not want to remain part of the vine, want to break off from the vine, and if they do not survive. If they do, they die. It is only those who remain in the vine and draw their life from the vine, draw their sap from the vine, who really bear fruit. In the second reading of today, John summarizes what bearing fruit is when he says to those who are listening to him that the way which Jesus taught is the way of love. As branches, what we are called to do, we are called to do two things. First, we are called to be united with each other, not to separate ourselves from each other. And second, we are called to nurture and nourish and love one another. If Jesus has taught his disciples as the vine, what they must do is they must have unity among themselves, and they must have love within themselves, a love which will be shown in the action that they do. John begins the reading of today by telling us that love is not only theoretical, love is not only verbal, love has to be shown in action if it is to be true love. The only genuine love worthy of the name is unconditional. And while in the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verses 1 to 4, Paul gives us a very beautiful definition of love. My own definition of love is very simple. In love, there is no I. Even in the word as we write it in the English language, there is an L and an O and a B and an E, but there is no I. That is why we read in the first reading of today from the Acts of the Apostles that the disciples lived as witnesses of this love. And because they lived as witnesses of this love and united among themselves, others were drawn to it. Others who witnessed the disciples, who experienced them, who encountered them, began to ask about them. Who are you? that you do these things and that you do them in this way. They were asking about the disciples' identity. Who are you? In other words, where do you draw your inspiration from? Where do you draw your motivation from? Where do you draw your strength from? Who are you? That you do these things, that you are able to love even those who hate you, that you have no enemies whatever, that you want to welcome everybody into your fold, that you make no distinction between the rich and the poor, that you make no distinction of color, caste and creed, that you do these things and that you do them in this way, in such a loving manner, expecting nothing in return. Your reward seems to be in the doing of the action. So who really are you? Can we be part of you? Can we also join your fold? Can we also be one of those branches that draw sap from this wonderful vine? Today, 2000 years later, the Lord still remains the vine, and the Father, God, still remains the vine dresser, and we still remain branches. We are called to that unity, not to separate ourselves from the vine, because if we do, we will die. We will have no life in us. We cannot draw sap by ourselves. We have to remain united to the vine, and we must show that we are united to the vine like the first Christian community did, by drawing others into the vine, not only by the words that we speak, but by the actions that we perform. So that those who encounter us must also ask about us today, like they asked about the Christians of the time of Jesus. Who are you that you do these things and that you do them in this way?